Good morning. Today we start the fourth parak at the bottom of 36b. We'll continue to talk about Pigel. Beis Shammai Omrim, Kol Nitanu al Mizbeach HaChitzon. Any blood that you do zrika on the outside mizbeach, which is where most of the karbanos were burned. Shanasam b'matana achas. If you did only one of the zrikos, one of the applications of blood, so really you're supposed to do two generally. If you only do one, kiper, then it works. You get the person who brings the carbon gets the required or the desired atonement. Ubachatas, in the case of a chatas carbon shnei matanos, you need two. So two out of four. With a chatas, there are typically four zrikos. Not really a zrika in that case. It's you actually take the blood with your finger and put it on the mizbeach. You're supposed to do four, like all four corners, but two is sufficient. Beis Hillel says even one is sufficient for a chatas. Lefikach. Therefore, so how does this apply to people, or what does it have to do with people? If you have a carbon, you do your first application of blood uh, properly. And then when you do the second one, you have a pigul thought, like thought of that you're going to eat it outside of its proper time or place. So what's the deal here? Like you already basically finished the ikar of the korban, right? You achieved the kapara. You did the first zrika properly. Can you still make it pigul with the second application of blood? Um, then keeper. You did the carbon was valid. Um, the and so the it seems like the mission is saying is yeah, it's valid and it doesn't become disqualified by the subsequent pigul attempt. But what if you, on the first application of blood, you had an intent to eat to eat the carbon outside of its time period, and then in the second case, the second application of blood, you had the thought of eating it chutzlim koma outside of its proper place. So pigul, that's pigul because even though the we say in general that the pigul thought has to be consistent throughout, but in this case, you've already made a pigul with the first application of blood because that's the ikar. That made the carbon would have made the carbon valid. So you can make it pigul already, and the mixing in of a separate invalid thought with the second application of blood doesn't really apply because it's only the second application. It's not that important. So pigul v'chayav cars. So the first improper thought on the first application of blood is enough to make it pigul. Anything that the blood was supposed to be done, the zrika was supposed to be done on the inside mizbeach. Shachisa achas mina matanos lo kiper. If you leave in the mizbeach hapnimi, if you leave out one of the zrikos, then it doesn't work. Lefikach nasan kulan kunan. So how does this apply to pigul? If you did all the blood applications properly, but va'achash lo katiknas, you did three. You did the first three, let's say, properly, and then the last one improperly. Then it's pigul because the last one is just as essential as any of the others. But no, but the Mishnah says no, psula vein bo kares. It's puzzle, but you do not get kares for it. Because um, because you have to because all of the four together have to have the same bad thought in order for it to, in other words, if all four are equally important, they all four have to have the same improper thought to give you kares. However, the carbon does in fact become invalid.
Now, the first group we were talking about the Mizbeach Achitzon, right?
Correct.
Achitzon.
Correct.
So does the Chitzon have two zrikot and the Pnimi has arba zrikot? Is that always the case, or?
It's the difference between two and four is between a chatas and other karbanos. So it's not this. I mean, It could be, I don't remember offhand which are the ones that are brought on the Mizbeach HaPnimi, but it could be either two or four, I guess. But the same principle applies. Tana Rabban. Minayin Nitana al Mizbeach HaChitzam. Carbonos that are on the outside Mizbeach. Excuse me. Shenasana b'matana achas shekiper. Where do you get this rule? That if you only did one zrika, then it's sufficient. Talmud Lamer Torah says, "V'dam zvachacha yishafech." The blood of your zevach of your carbon should be poured on the mizbeach, and then you eat the meat. V'abasar tochel. So it's everything is written here in the singular, implying that the dam and not demay maybe. Um, it's written in the singular, so that indicates that one zrika is enough. V'hai lachi diasa. The Gemara says, "Well, wait a minute. Is that really what you're going to get from? Is that what you get from this pasuk? You get something else." We have another thing that we learn from that pasuk. Minayin l'chol adamim shatu'unin matan dam liyasod. How do you know that you take whatever blood is left over, you pour it on the yisod, on the base of the mizbeach? That same pasuk. So we're using that pasuk already. Nafkale midrabi. So Gemara says no. We got the first limud from that the first application of blood is sufficient. Where do we get that from? From a different brisa of Rabbi the Tanya, Rabbi Yomer, v'hanishar badam yimatzeh. We're talking about a bird chatzas here. Whatever blood is left in it, you squeeze out on the wall of the mizbeach. Say al yisod mizbeach. You pour on the yisod. Shein tam lomar badam. Why does it have to use the word badam? You can just say v'hanishar. You might say whatever is left, you squeeze onto the yisod. What is the extra word badam? Matam lomar badam. Because without this pasuk, I only know about those karbanos that require 4 applications of blood, that the rest of the blood has to go on the yesod. What about other karbanos? Talmud Lomar. That pasuk we just quoted. Limeid badam al kol hadamim shetuni matan damim leyesod. That extra word badam that tells us that. All blood has to be poured, all leftover blood or remainder blood has to be poured on the yesod. So that's where you get that from. And so the first pasuk that we used, which was v'dam zvachacha yishafech, is now free to tell us what we wanted to learn from it, which is that one application of blood is sufficient. Lakase. So Gemara says, well, wait, still, lahachi diasa. That's what you want to use dam zvachacha for. We have another application of that pasuk. Mibayle lechedatanya. Minayin l'nitanim bezrika shenasanim b'shvicha yatsa. What if you poured the blood instead of throwing the blood? All right, zrika is, for lack of a better word, I'd say sprinkling maybe or throwing the blood. You're supposed to do that, but what if you pour it directly from the vessel? How do you know that works? We're using that pasuk. Oh, so we still have something else that we're learning from that pasuk. So what's the deal? So Rabbi Akiva disagrees. Rabbi Akiva says that's you don't get that from this pasuk. He doesn't get that rule at all. Pouring has to be done by pouring, and zrika has to be done by zrika, sprinkling, and you can't mix one. So he does not hold that if you were supposed to do zrika and you did shvicha, it's okay. He holds it's not okay. So this pasuk doesn't teach us anything. This pasuk teaches us something else, which is, as we saw, or what we're trying to get to, that one application of blood is sufficient. And how do we know this is, where do we get this? What's the source for this, Rabbi Akiva? It's none. Berach birkas pesach pater es shel zevach. If you did a bracha on the carbon pesach, then you don't have to make a bracha on the chagiga that you eat afterwards. Shel zevach lo pater es haPesach. But if you uh, do the bracha on the chagiga, then that does not um, include the Pesach. You have a separate bracha to make on the Pesach. Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Kiva Omer,
What bracha is this? Was it not eating it, or a bracha bringing it, or what's the bracha here we're talking about?
there was a bracha shekisham mitzvos of etzivanu lecholos haPesach or something like that, and lecholos hachagiga. I don't know the exact wording, but something like there was a specific bracha. It's a mitzvah, right? So just like you make a bracha on sitting in the sukkah, you make a bracha on these karbanos. So the Gemara is saying that if you make the bracha first on the carbon pesach, that includes the chagiga. Rabbi Kiva Omer lo zupater zuv lo zupater zuv. No, one has nothing to do with the other. You have to make a separate bracha on the pesach on the chagiga. Doesn't matter which one you do first. Um,
Does everyone
so
make this bracha, or is it just the one who offers it, or is it for the chabura, or
it's the eating of it.
it's
Everybody make a
eating it?
bracha.
But you make a bracha on eating the lamb, she'akol niyeh b'dvaro, if you're eating the meat. So you're making a separate bracha
No,
on.
when you eat the matzah on Pesach, you make hamotzi, and you also say al achilas matzah.
Correct. That's correct. That
So it
is
would be similar to this, I suppose. Yeah, we're talking about the birchas hamitzvah, not the birchas hananim, if that's what you're asking.
uh-huh. I'm not. I wasn't aware there's such a separate mitzvah
Well,
on
we've
well, we don't have a korban pesach, but I mean,
exactly right. So you would never have encountered this in your lifetime. So you are hardly to be blamed for not knowing that. Um, and they probably didn't teach it in school either. Um, but so Rabbi Akiva says one has nothing to do with the other. So we are extending that idea that it's a little unclear like how you apply one to the other, but um, uh, just as the Pesach and the Chagiga require a different Birchas mitzvah, so too the pouring and are completely separate from each other. In other words, you can't fulfill your obligation of eating one by eating the other. So too, when it comes to pouring or sprinkling the blood, one has nothing to do with the other. So it's a little unclear to me, like how you derive what these two cases have to do with each other. Um,
how many things are we learning from this pasuk? Then it seems there are different
yeah,
opinions. That I
well,
mean, are
that's
we learning
exactly
only
the
one
question.
thing, or are we learning, or it seems like we're rejecting one Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi, and then it's rejected. Where we learn something from.
Right. Well, this is very typical of the Gemara. It's trying to slot every
I know.
halacha, every relevant halacha, trying to apply it from a different pasuk. Right. So we wanted to say, you know what we learned from that pasuk? That one application of blood is enough. And then he said, wait a minute, we learned something else from that pasuk, and we found an alternate source for that. That second thing we learned from a different pasuk. So now the first pasuk is again available for what we're looking for to do, and then we challenged it again and said, well,
Right.
wait a minute, we have this other thing that we learned from that pasuk anyway. And then we said, well, but not according to Rabbi Akiva. So according to Rabbi Akiva, you could still say that that the pasuk that we're talking about, "Dam zvachecha yishafech," is available to teach us that one application of blood is enough, is sufficient. And then we're going to try again. Still going to find something else that we are already learning from Dam Zochecha Yishafech. Rabbi Shmuel Omer, Mitoch Shenemar Ach B'char Shor or B'char Kesev or B'char Eiz. Um, um, the Yeah, that the bechor of all these animals, you do zrika and you burn the emurim. Lamanu livchar shaton matan dam of emurim l'gavim mizbeach. So this tells us that there's what to do with a bechor, right? Um, that there's a zrika that you put dam on the mizbeach and you burn the emurim on the mizbeach. Maser Pesach Minayin. So that applies. That's talking about Bechor. Where do you get Maser and Pesach? That the same rule applies. Talmud Lomar v'dam zvachacha yishafech. There's our pasuk. So we are using it for something else to teach us about the Zrika and Emurim of Pesach and Maser. We get that from Dam Zvachecha. So how can you say you use Dam Zvachecha for our Mishnah to prove our case? So the answer is several like Rabbi Yossi Glili. Rabbi Yossi Glili doesn't agree with that. All right, doesn't think that that's the case. That Maser and Pesach are the same as Bechor in this respect, and so the pasuk is not teaching us that. Titania, Rabbi Yossi Glili, Damo lo nemar ela damam. It says as damo yishpoch al mizbeach. Right. It's as damam. Sorry, as damam. In plural, their blood. So by using the plural, chelbam and it uses the plural of chelav as well. So by using the plural, it's not just the bechor, about which it says explicitly what to do, but by using the plural, it includes Maser and Pesach, and therefore you don't need the pasuk of V'dam zvachecha yishafech for that. You have it's available to teach us about one application of blood sufficing. Rabbi Shmuel, Haikra Mapik Le'elahachi. Okay, so according to Rabbi Shmuel, does he really use that pasuk Mapik Le'elahachi? One second. Oh yeah, so how do you explain Rabbi Shmuel, right? So fine, Rabbi Akiva, we're okay with Rabbi Akiva, but what about Rabbi Shmuel who argues with Rabbi Akiva? And he does use that pasuk to teach us something else. Whereas just as we did yesterday, Trey Tanai, I'll leave it Rabbi Shmuel. We don't know what Rabbi Shmuel really says. Indeed, these are contradictory statements. Rabbi Shmuel appears to be using the pasuk for two different things, but really what happened was that there was a dispute among his students. Some say that Rabbi Shmuel used the pasuk like our Mishnah, and some say that he used it for a different purpose. So now,
So in the end, we're using this pasuk for one thing. That's normal, right?
yeah, it just we're not sure, since it's something that's subject to a machlokas, you have different ways of assigning the pasuk. If you agree with this rule, then you can use the pasuk for it. If you don't agree with this rule, then you're not using the pasuk for it, you're using something else. So Bishlam Rabbi Shmuel, and our Mishnah or the rule of our Mishnah will only apply according to some views, right? Because only those who aren't using the pasuk for something else. Now Bishlam Rabbi Shmuel, I understand according to Rabbi Shmuel, the Mokim la Kule B'Bchor. So it makes sense that the whole pasuk is talking about Bechor because it says Ach Bechor Shor Bechor is Bechor Chasav Ahayin Dechsiv Uvesaram Yelach. That's why it says that the meat goes to the Kohen. All the meat goes to the Kohen. So that applies to Bechor. El Rabbi Yossi, Demokilon Maser Pesach. Rabbi Yossi, who says we're also talking about Maser and Pesach. Maser Pesach Balim Achlile. Balim Achlile. It's like the Kohanim don't get all of the meat of the Maser and Pesach. They don't get any of it. The owners get the meat. My ubsarim yelach. What does it mean that you, the Kohen, get the meat? The answer is echad tam b'echad balmum. If it's a bechor with a mum, then so it tells us that there are two types of bechor. Why does it use the plural? So we wanted to say use the plural because it's including Maser and Pesach, but then we just asked, but it can't be because the rules aren't the same for Bechor, Maser, and Pesach in all respects. So now we're saying no, the plural is it's all referring to Bechor. Why does it use plural? Because there are two types of Bechor. There's a Bechor with a mum and a Bechor without a mum. A Bechor with a mum is, it's brought as a korban. And you follow the whole procedure, but if it has a mum, you can't bring it as a korban. Still, Basarim Yelach, the meat goes to the Kohanim. Limed al Bechor Balmum Shanitan LeKohen teaches you that even the Balmum, even the Bechor that has a mum, goes to the Kohen. Shlomatinu lo Bechol Terakula. That's a unique rule. right? Generally speaking, if something's disqualified from being a carbon, then whatever happens to it. Do you have to let it? Does it then become like not kodesh anymore? Do you have to redeem it? Whatever. But nowhere else do we see that the Kohen gets to keep the animal that's a balmum, only b'chor.
Well, can he sacrifice? Oh, he
No,
just
no, no. It
roasts it?
can't go on the mizbeach, but he gets
So-
to slaughter it and eat it.
Or he
It's
slaughtered
one of the
it
matnas kahuna.
in his backyard or whatever, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Rabbi Shmuel, Nafkale mi lechayeh de seifa. Where would Rabbi Shmuel get this rule that the Bechor Balmum goes to the Kohen? There's another extra word there that he uses lechayeh, but by saying it should be yours, that's extra, and so it's including the Balmum. Okay. Bishlam Rabbi Yossi Aglili Demokile Name B'Maser Pesach. So according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili now, who says that the rules of Bechor also apply to Maser and Pesach, Hainu Dichsiv Lo Sifte Kodesh Haim. You can't redeem them, right? Haim Kravin Ventimurasan and Krava. The Bechor itself has to be sacrificed. You can't switch it, and the same applies. Um, And the same applies to Maser and Pesach. Utzna, and then we have a Mishnah. Tmuras b'choru maser, hein uvladon uvlad vladon asof kol olam harei hein k'b'choru maser. If you try to do a tmura, an exchange of a b'chor and maser, it doesn't work. Like everything becomes kodesh. V'yachlu b'mumon l'balim. And if they have a mum, they can be eaten by the owners. Utnan, we have a Mishnah. Amar Bishua, Shamati Shetmuras Pesach Kreva. What about a Pesach? If you try to exchange a Pesach, um, um, yeah, can you bring that as a carbon? So Shamati Shuv Tmuras Pesach Kreva. I heard once that it can be a carbon. Tmuras Pesach Eda Kreva. I heard another time that the exchange for Pesach does not go in the Mizbeach. Mainly the Farish. I don't understand. Like, which is it? El Rabbi Shmuel. Okay, so what we prove from that is that there are cases where you don't do where you can't do a Tmura for a Pesach. Okay, so just like a Bechor and Maser. El
What
Rabbi
would be the
Shmuel.
reason to do a Tamura for a Pesach? What would be the
Yeah,
reason?
who knows? Maybe it got lost temporarily or permanently,
Well,
right?
then
You
one would have
designated
to
your
bring
Pesach and it wandered off.
so then
You,
one would have to bring something else in its place. I was thinking about that. I mean, yeah, person is chayav to bring a korban pesach, right?
uh-huh. Yeah,
So
then what
if the
happens if you
animal's
find, all
lost, what do
right,
you do?
what happens if then before Erev Pesach you then find the original one again? So the second one is a Tamura.
So then aren't both of them kodesh then?
Yes, but we're not going into the details here. But according to this Mamar, um, Rabbi Yeshua, it's not clear. Like there might be different circumstances in which you can use the second one or cannot use the second one. It doesn't go into details, but the point is that there are cases where there is such a thing as a Tamura for a Pesach. El Rabbi Shmuel, but according to Rabbi Shmuel, the Mokalei Kulei B'Bchor, who says no, that pasuk applies only to Bechor. In other words, that there's no Tamura. Lo Sifte Kodesh Haim. Master Pesach do Korev Tamura Saminale. Where would you get the rule that you can't use the truma of a Pesach? More answer is yeah, you can. Maser Gamar Avora Mi Bechor. Um, you have Gzera Shabbat, Kol Asher Yav or Tachas HaShabbat by Maser, and V'Havarta Kol Peter Rechem Lashem by Bechor. So by the equivalence of those terms, we compare Maser to Bechor, and Pesach Bad Yaksiv Bay. The Torah writes explicitly, Kesev, it has to be a sheep. Matam Lomer Kesev. Why does it have to be a sheep? Im Kesev. Why does that say if you choose a kesef? L'rabos tmuras pesach achar pesach shetikar shlamim, to tell you that if you have a tmura, that you should still bring it on the mizbeach. Of course, it can't be a carbon pesach anymore because pesach is over, but you can still bring it as a shlamim. Yachal af lifnei pesach. Maybe you could before pesach you could bring it as a shlamim and not as the actual pesach. Tamalomar who. Pesach hu Hashem. Only that original Pesach um, animal can be brought as the actual Pesach, and the substitute can be a shlamim and has to be wait till after Pesach.
So what's even the point of bringing it? I don't understand. If it's after Pesach,
Yeah,
it's
because you
not
made
even
it
Shayach.
Kodesh.
What?
You made it Kodesh as a Pesach. Obviously, it can't be a Pesach because you already did a Pesach, right? You don't have two carbon Pesachs, but the Pesach is also a subset of Shlamim.
Right.
So, so you can still bring this animal as a Shlamim. Okay, so true, you can't bring it as a Pesach, but it's still a Tamura in the sense that it became Kodesh, right? Okay, you bring it as a Pesach for, let's say, for technical reasons, but it's still a valid korban that you could bring as a shlamim, so that's what you have to do.
So that would be the case, for instance, if you found it, the original one. If there were, then you have two of them. But if you didn't
Yeah,
find
so
the
if the one
first
got
one,
lost and you only have the one,
then you can use that.
then you'd use that one. What happens if after Pesach you find the first one? I
Oh,
guess the
okay.
same thing would apply, right? That it can still be a shlamim.
All right.
Um, okay, so we had this whole series of other uses of the pasuk dams v'achecha yishafech. Where do they get the idea that that if something that requires two applications of blood on the mizbeach hachitzon, and you only did one, that's sufficient? Where do they get that from? Sorry, Luke Beis Hillel, they hold like Beis Hillel, Diamre, Af Chatas, Shanasana Matanachas Kiper, that the Alfino Kulu Michatas, they hold that a Chatas it's enough to have one matnas dam, one application of blood, and that serves as a model for all other karbanos that have two applications of blood. Okay. Okay, good. Next part of the Mishnah. Achatos shtei matanos. So achatos, that four applications of blood are ideal. Two is sufficient. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, my Talmud Beis Shammai. Why? So Beis Shammai disagrees with Beis Hillel and says that. One second. Yeah, Beis Shammai says that Beis Hillel said you only need one for a chatas, and Beis Shammai said you need two. Why the difference? Like I understand, saying that once you've done the matnas dam, that's fine, right? You should do three more applications, but you did one, that's enough. But what's the idea of that you have to have two? Like either it should be one or all of them required. Why two? According to Beis Shammai, Amar Rafina, my time of Beis Shammai. Karnos, 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 because the word Karnos is used three times. The horns of the mizbeach, top of the mizbeach on the corner, they had these protrusions. They're called horns or Karnos. So and each one is we're reading it as plural. Harikan shesh. So that's three times two is six. Arba lemitzvah. So it's telling you that four matanos are the ideal. Ushtayim la'akev, but only two are required. Now it's a little strange because if there are six, then maybe there should be six applications of the blood, right? But that's not the case. We know it's four. So what's this multiplicity? This six-fold application. So the Beis Shammai is saying four is the ideal, and two is the minimum. Yeah, Beis Hillel. So what about Beis Hillel? But you only need one. Karnos, Karnos, Karnos. So it's a Korean Ksiv thing. In two cases, Karnos is written without the yud, so it can be read as singular. And in one case is written not the yud, sorry, the vav,
The
the vav.
above.
And in one case is written with the vav, which is definitely plural. So you have single, single, and double. So that's four, right? So two, harikan arba, shalosh lemitzvah v'yachas liyakev. So again, this is a very, this is something that like they knew in advance and are trying to find some kind of support for it. So here we're saying there's four karnos. So three tells you that the last three are ideal, but only one is necessary. V'yemakula mitzvah. So now the Gemara asks the obvious question: why don't you say that? So there are four. So you know that there's four applications, and from Karnos you should learn that all four are
All four.
required. Um, and are ma'akev. Gemara says kapara b'chdi lo ashkachan. So if that were the case, what would be the minimum? Um, so you have to say that one of the karnos teaches you that at least one is necessary, and then the other three are available to tell you that the last three are optional, or not optional, but like not ma'akev. People are saying, well, or you could say, "Hainu tamu beis ahani mikra, v'ahani masaras." That we're going to take into account both the way it's read and the way it's written. Ahani mikra mutfuye chada. The way we read it, karnos, um, that adds um, that adds one. And if you go by the way it's written, then you have one less. Because you have 1 second. So you have Mikra and Masaras. One gives you 6 minimum, and the other gives you 4 minimum. So which is it? So Beis Hillel, according to this view, Beis Hillel is saying you have to take into account both 6 and 4. So it's like a compromise on 5, which is very far-fetched to me. But so 5 means that 4 is ideal and 1 is required, according to Beis Hillel. That's where they get that from. Almiatas, the Gemara says, wait a minute. L'totafos, l'totafos, l'totafos. What about tefillin, right? Where we have the same thing. It's written 3 times in plural, but twice it's written without the vav and once with the vav. Harekan arba. So that's 4. 1, 1, and 2 makes 4. So that's where we get the 4 compartments in the tefillin. Ane krava, ane masoros. So if you're going to say that Beis Hillel says you have to take into account both Mikra and Masoras 4 and 6, Hamisha Bate by Lameva, then you should compromise on 5. Whereas there's Savalak Rabbi Akiva, Diamar, Tot Bekasfe Shtayim, Post Be'afriki Shtayim. What is the word Totafos in the first place? It's borrowed from different languages. It means 2 plus 2, and that is where you get the 4 compartments as filled. The Gemara says El Meata, basukos, basukos, basukos. You have the same thing when it comes to sukkos. How do you know you have to have 4 walls? Because you have singular, singular, and plural. Same thing. Ani mikravani masaras. If it were the case that you have to take into account both 4 and 6 and compromise on 5, Hamisha Dafnasa by Lameva. You should have 5 walls of a minimum of 5 walls of a sukkah. Whereas there's Hasam Dalchad Lugufe. There, the 6 you have to take out one of those because it's telling you about the sukkah itself. And another one because you need something to tell you about the schach. So only 3 are left out of 5. And then the Halachal Moshe Sinai says, okay, really looks like from the Torah you only need 3 walls, and the Halachal Moshe Sinai that the third wall can be minimized. It can only be like a half a wall, right? Only just need a tefach. Okay, so it's all very weird. Why don't you not say the same thing about totafos, right? That achas legufe has to tell you about the mitzvah in the first place. That's unclear. El Miata, so now we're going to ask, Vitama Shvuayim, a woman who gives birth to a girl, becomes Tame for 2 weeks. Shivim, but Shvuayim can be read 70, right? So maybe instead of Shvuayim 2 weeks, it means 70 days. So then we should compromise a honey krova, honey masaras. So you should find the midpoint between 14 and 70, which would be arba'im utrein by lamesa. The midpoint between 14 and 70 is 42. So maybe if you're going to go with this compromise between Mikra and Masoras, you should do the same thing for the tuma of a woman who gives birth to a girl. She should be tummy for 42 days. Shani Hasam Dichsiv Kinidasa. There it tells you that Shuayim Kinidasa, right? Well, we know how long uh, is a woman tame as a nida. Um, so not that it's exactly the same, but it's similar. So the 2 weeks is closer to a nida tuma than 42 or 70 or whichever. So by saying shwayim kinidasa, that implies that in this case we don't compromise between mikra and masaras, but we go with the mikra, with the shwayim. And we'll stop here for today.
This whole discussion of the Mikra, the Masorah and Mikra, that was presented in the beginning of Sanhedrin. It's all discussion with the judges and the interpretation of these the verses. Shivim, Shivuayim, and Totafot, and brought from Africa, and whole discussion was the beginning of Sanhedrin.
Yeah, and I think Mikra Masoras appears in several places in Shas in general.
Could be, but I remember that from Sanhedrin. It's almost a repetition.
Yeah, yeah.
It might be good. It's very close to a repetition of that discussion there.
Okay, well, that happens frequently, right? Yeah, that's not uncommon. Okay, have a good day, everybody.